Here we have a LeMond pretty blue spine bike, Zurich model, which means it's half carbon and half steel. So if you saw one of these in your neck of the woods and wanted to purchase it in a state like this, or condition, that means, how much it would cost you after this? Welcome to I Know a Guy Bicycles.
Welcome to I Know a Guy Bicycles, hanging out with the guy. Hi, I'm Justin, the guy. Obviously, I have a garage shop. Taking scary how to use bikes one bike at a time.
If you like these videos, please like and subscribe. Welcome back to I Know a Guy Bicycles, hanging out with the guy. Hey, I'm Justin, the guy, on this old bike series. So we're looking at this LeMond Zurich spine bike. Oh, these are very rare. Well, not very, very rare, but they're rare enough as only were produced a couple years, maybe 3 or 4 under the truck umbrella. But we'll get into that in a second. But first off, if you bought or saw a bike like this, you're like, ooh, I saw that bike on one of my videos, or I have my buddy that rides one of those and says they're a great ride, and I figured out it's my size. I want to go check it out. Well, there's a top 5 list that I have, and also a top 20 list to check out to see, to be prepared when you go look at that bike, because there's a lot of hidden costs that equate to bikes, and it could almost double what you've actually purchased it. So let's take this bike example here. And I've been seeing these, $400 or $500 in the used market here in Colorado. So let's just take that as a presumption. And like you paid, okay, you should roll up and you're like, okay, you need some work, maybe some tires, bar tape, definitely cables and housing, has some scuffs. So I'm gonna have to either do some sweat equity myself, or I'm gonna have to take it to the shop and pay for that. If you're paying for that in a shop setting, you're going to be on average about $200 to $300 depending on the shop and what they're going to charge you. But for me, as in parts go, essentially it's like bar tape, pedals, cables, housing, and some other various mix. I already have a preset number, about $100 in costs on parts ish on per bike that I purchased. So that equates to this. So if you said the person was non-negotiable, I paid $500 and put another $100 in the parts into it, then you have yourself a $600 pretty much ready to go ride bike. That's if you know what to do and how to do it, right? If you set it professionally done at a bike shop, it's going to cost you somewhere probably something like this, definitely about $200 to $300 to get it up to where it's fine-tuned, safe to ride, and all those things, right? So that's going to put your actual all-in about $800 to $900. And keep in mind, that's kind of how, like any sport, right? You got the initial investment and everything else that goes with it. And you can be very savvy on a lot of those parts, or helmet and so forth, gloves and shorts, price and those kinds of things out. But when it comes down to safety and labor, I can't express this anymore. The more you put into it, as in safety concerns addressed, well, pennies on a dollar compared to ER visit. So that's definitely the case when it comes to safety, and safety is always first in the mechanic's mind, and also it should be in yours when you go for that ride, because it's already enough adventure out there and dangers regardless of your bike failing on you, or having an issue that causes you to have a crash and so forth. So anywho, it's not supposed to be fun, right? Hey, anyway, so there's a story amongst this bike itself. Back in time, only a couple years ago, not a couple decades on this time. This bike actually is a little bit older, but we're talking about when I purchased this bike to be refurbished. It was about maybe 3 years now. And it was during the COVID period, so stuff was rough. I mean, it's just expensive and rough. But I worked in a bike shop that carried LeMonds, and I remember these were new when they came out new. And I was a service manager at that time at that shop. And they were really cool, really pretty. They had a nice glitter clear coat. This one has a lot of chips and scratches to it. So I'm going to put a little detail as much as I can on this particular one. And that's what I did initially too. And the story is I bought that bike, I fixed it up, And a customer contacted me and wanted to have his son test ride it, and he test rode it, and it was one of the things that I missed. I'm not perfect. I missed that the middle chain ring was a little more worn out, so it was skipping. So on the fly, I switched out the chain ring and got them going. And it turns out to be a really solid bike. They really enjoyed it. That individual is now a very good customer of mine. I do a lot of service on his bikes. He's bought several other bikes for me. It's one of those things, you just never know. When you're in a retail setting, you just never know where a customer can become one of your great long-time customers, almost friend-like, in a sense where, you know, they message you like, yeah, come on over, whatever, you know, we'll get you set up, and you do those extra things. That's the kind of rapport you want to build up with your shop or your mechanic that you're working with. It just, hands down, it's just great. Once we have those solid customers, we love them. I mean, it's just makes our life easier, less stress. And this is actually in for a tune-up. And you know, it's like, well, my son didn't really say it needed anything. It just, you know, and he knows his son pretty well in the sense that there's some stuff going on, but he doesn't know exactly. So here we are, taking scary out of used right here. So let's check this out. I'm going to do assessment like you would if you take them to a bike shop. You're going to see a person like me. That's going to be a service rider. Option, there is more. More, you say? Push the more button. Push it. Push it. I dare you to push it. Once you push that button, you get more details about the video you are watching, in addition to all the tools that I use in the shop, as well as suggestion for improving your ride. In addition to help me provide advocacy in the cycling community, also links to other social media accounts as well as my website to find the products that I actually sell and other insights in the industry. Other videos linked below. Extend your cycling experience here on YouTube. And now back to your original programming. We're going to put it up on a stand, and we're going to do some checks right off the bat. You know, one's going to be a chain checker, see if that chain is stretched, kind of thing. And, you know, being a mechanic and working on a bike multiple times, you kind of, you know, it's like you develop a relationship with the bike, you know. It's like, this is, I know you well, in the sense that, you know, quirks, I mean, you may not remember every little detail, but you remember the bike, that kind of thing. And a lot of times you'll put a little extra oomph into it, or extra attention to detail, extra love, because they're coming back, right? They're like, they like your work and what you do, and you're just going to do over the 110, 120%. And this guy is definitely a stretch chain, so you're getting a new chain. The cassette's going to be tested when I'm test riding it. I have to do it under pressure and load to see if anything's going to pop. But rule of thumb is 2 chains to 1 cassette. So if you burn through 1 chain, you're on your 2nd chain. Your 3rd chain means you're going to have a cassette that needs to be replaced. That's the industry standard-ish. So that's something to look into. And also they're going to want to go through all the gears, make sure the shifting's going everywhere. The cable and housing on this guy seems kind of bent a little, so that might need to be addressed. It doesn't seem like it's affecting the shifting at all. And the kid's right. I mean, it shifts and it stops. That's what a bike's supposed to do, right? But when you're a tech and mechanic, you look at preventative maintenance too. So looking at the rim, this has kind of a tire that's peeling down, which is pretty common, known on Continentals to do on older ones. Reason being is they just dry out, peel down. It doesn't mean the tire is bad. It's just getting a little older. This one is starting to flatten out a little bit, but it seems like it has. So maybe it's towards the end of the season. I'm like, maybe at the beginning of next season, think about getting some new tires, invest in some new tires. Right now, we're just going to mainly look at the performance. There's a little bit of wobble in the rim, so that's going to need to be trued. And service techs are going to want to take the wheels off, and that's the only real way to check the hub and see how that feels. That feels pretty smooth. The cassette feels pretty solid, and it runs pretty smooth. It just needs to be cleaned. So the wheel's going to be fine. Just needs a little bit, a little bit of wobble. It's just attention to those spokes to true it up. And then we're going to check the front. And it's like the ABCs, right? Air, and it's holding air, And what I do is I air them up to pressure at the beginning, especially on the refurbished ones. And when I get to that bike, if it's like dead flat, I know the tube is toast. And same thing when I'm doing the repair, I'll air them up first and see if they hold air through the duration of the tune-up. This one's holding, I mean, it feels firm, and the front hub feels real smooth still, so it doesn't seem to be any loose. Check the headset, it seems to be smooth and not loose. Binder bracket feels pretty good. And looking at the brake pads, a little bit of material melted down a little bit, but it looks like I have still a lot more of there's like limit lines in a sense. When you don't see those lines anymore, they're replaced, the pads need to be replaced. So on this guy, you know, barring the detailing of the frame, which most shops don't do, so that's kind of my custom thing, if you will, for me to do. And granted, I'm not going to do touch-up paint and that kind of thing, but I'm going to definitely polish it up and clean it and put a good protective wax coating on it to protect the steel portion, of course, get all this grime and grit underneath there and bring the paint back to life and protect the frame as much as possible. What I would suggest for this individual, for this bike, is at least a standard tune. And what is a standard tune? You go into a bike shop and they'll have little packages on there. Sometimes a laundry list of things they do, and sometimes it's really vague and you're like, say what? No, who now? Because you're like, what do you mean by just adjustments and tightening bolts and wiping down the bike for $100? I mean, you think they'd be a little bit more than that, which there is, but maybe not in some shops. So ask that question. The laundry list of a standard tune in my head, and what I've been, industry for decades now, is, we true the wheels, adjust the hubs, adjust the derailleurs, adjust the brakes, do any kind of, it's mostly adjustments on the first level tune-up of any kind of bike shop. It's just kind of going through. So, truing the wheel would be fine on this guy, adjusting the brakes, adjusting the shifting, inspecting, but the chain needs to be installed. But some shops will okay, we'll charge you labor to install the chain, and the chain is another $20-30. So you got another, additional labor and chain part, which could equate to about $50 to $60 on top of that tune-up. So keep that in mind. Ask those questions, because you'll get that laundry list sticker or receipt, and you're like, what am I paying here? This guy needs bar tape. Bar tape on this guy, you can get, the $15 set of bar tape to $80 tape. There's different flavors in there. We'll just go with the inexpensive version, which is like the $15 version. Bar wrap per shop, all depends, between $20 to $30 to wrap bars. So you add that on top of the tune-up as well. And if any cables and housing that we replace, possibly one or two, that's going to be additional, probably $15 to $20 per cable and parts on that also. So that's where you get into tune-up packages. So the next level up package for me is, I think, 150-ish, somewhere around there. That includes the labor of replacing the cables and housing. Depending on our shop, my tune-up might be a little bit higher. My prices are a little bit lower because I have lower overhead, obviously. But keep in mind that sometimes there's a balance act, right? So if I go to 150, I do the drivetrain clean that covers the cost of the labor of this. And if I do like the peak performance of the top of the line tune-up, which is 250, it covers the labor of replacing the cables and the housing. Sometimes parts are included and sometimes not, so you got to keep that in mind as well. So in this particular one, I would probably say, yeah, you need a drivetrain clean. I'm going to be taking the chain off. You might as well clean everything else so it starts off fresh with the new chain. That's usually a good way to go. And then a la carte the cable and housing. So the 150 with the extra $30 lift puts you about 180. And what that does, if you're keeping this all monies and cents, you're getting more cleaning of the drivetrain, detailing of the wheels and the cables and the housing. So it gets you a little bit further down that path of overhaul, right? So that's what we have. So this is going to run about that at the first swipe of estimate. Keep in mind, there's always hidden scaries that when a mechanic dives into something and goes, Oh wait, your lower bearing on your headset is toast. Or when I pop the crank, it felt smooth in the stand, but once I got it pulled apart and I do the hand tight, it's like, how's that kind of a grind feel, rubbing metal against metal? So those are the kind of things you don't know until you actually strip and go into it. So in your neck of the woods, those bike shops, those price points can vary. All the tech experiences can vary too. And it's one of those things is if you walk into a shop and you're like, okay, your board is very vague on what is included in the tune-up, what is included, and you ask them that, and it's like, oh, can I see do you have a checklist on that particular tune-up or a checklist in general that covers those things? And they should have one on hand. That's kind of like a gold nugget of industry standards in the sense that if they don't have a checklist, they're not standardizing the repairs. If they're not standardizing repairs, you don't know if you're going to get an A-team mechanic or a Z-team mechanic working on your bike. As being a service manager for years, we had a checklist, and that checklist kind of kept everybody on the same playing field in the sense of understanding what's expected on that particular repair in general for tune-ups. And then when it's double checked by another mechanic for safety, they go through that checklist and initial off on those, so you got two mechanics going through that. Ask if they have that process. If they don't have a checklist, I'd shop around and go look for another shop. Reason being, or unless you know the dude, the guy like me, that I already have a checklist in my head, and I've been doing it for over 30 years, so it's kind of like, if you're entrusted to that individual, that's fine. But if you walk into the service rider and there's 5 or 6 mechanics behind the wall, you don't know what's behind the wall, right? So let's pull the curtain back of the Oz show here and figure that out. There's all those mechanics. It could be stellar mechanics, and it's one of those things where you get a mechanic, they did the work, they did great notes, and you went for a ride and everything was solid. Remember that mechanic's name, because when you go back to that shop going, hey, I want to talk to Jimmy again, or have him take a look at this bike because he did such a stellar job on it. Or if there's an issue, go back and say, okay, I had mechanic Jimmy work on this. I just wanted to see if there was something else. Unfortunately, there is situations where people have to come back for issues, but to try to limit that down, that's why those are checklists. Right? Okay, long-winded on that booger of a situation. So yeah, the brake pads look pretty good on this. And yes, I have history with this bike, and it should go pretty good. But I know these riders, and they ride a lot. And they ride in some gunky stuff, and they don't let weather slow them down. So when it comes to that, I do a little extra cleaning, making sure the dirt is gone, the grime. I do extra polishing, and I do a lot of lube protection. In other words, I use a lot of Tri-Flow Superior Lube in a lot of places to give it a good coating and all the pivots and so forth to make sure, I treat it if I was on a coast where it's a very salty area. Reason being is they ride in the rain too, and they also take these bikes to different states and on trips. So, got to keep that in mind. So I treat all those bikes like, okay, worst environments possible, and not just kind of skimp over those things. That case being said, even with the skewer of the wheels, you pull these out, I have a nice coating of grease that's still there. That protects the skewer from rusting and getting inside. Do I need to do that in Colorado? Not really, not so much. But if this bike was in Michigan, in the Midwest, where there's huge humidity, this thing would seize up inside the hub. So it's one of those things, over time, of course, not overnight, but it's those kinds of details that when you've been working on bikes for a long time, you kind of pick up on those little tips and tricks kind of things and prevention, and it just became part of my repertoire working on a bike, the laundry list. And I learned how to do the greasing of the skewers back in like 91, 92. So I've been carrying that process for a long time. But yeah, the cable, the housing may need to be compromised here. On the last bike I had, the brakes were really kind of rough. Housing got compromised and there was rust inside there. So, water likes to travel in all sorts of different parts of the bike. This piece of housing in the back is notorious of drawing up a lot of that water spray and gunk, and it'll track it inside the housing. And if I had bikes where I've had so many like a light tune-up, and the shifting would not do anything. And once I replaced this piece of housing in the back, it basically came back to life. So looking at this, I mean, I can see a lot of dirt and contaminants already around the barrel adjuster, and I can see corrosion-ish. It's, it's the stainless steel or galvanized, so you're not going to see rust on derailleur cables, but you can see kind of like an ash white. That means if it's inside here where the cable is, the inside of the housing is compromised, so that little bit definitely needs to be replaced. That's going to get the shifter to perform like how it should and supposed to. So that's another little tidbit of gold nugget there. And in these cables, you technically can get some steel wool and clean them up, and clean them up really good and reuse them, because you don't want to be too wasteful. But if they have a lot of kinks and bends in them, what I like to do is I'll take the rear cable, swap it with the front, ditch the front cable, because usually this becomes too short anyway. So, and then you put a new derailleur cable for the rear. You're kind of saving and you're kind of refreshing and getting and also another weak point to cable, I'll just show you here. So pull this out, is this bend in the shifter. Okay, this little guy here, this is kind of the end of the shifter cable. And what happens, it ratchets it down for each shift. And this is with all shifters, so it keeps ratcheting. What happens here is this gets bent back and forth, and you take that pop can thing, after a while it starts, these will eventually break and fray, and when they fray inside, it's a booger, because it's like you're taking tweezers and stuff trying to get that, the metal shaving coils out, and you end up poking your finger and get a blood test done all at the same time. So that's where the weak point is. So really that's where the compromise point. So if you swap it to there where you shift less, then you put a new cable here that's going to add the smoothness to it. And also, the house, if you're already taking this apart anyway, the housing itself is not all that expensive. And this doesn't look like it's compromised, but I have a kink here. And what this is a splined housing. So I can see dirty contaminants on the end here, and this has kind of been sprawled out. So if I replace this with fresh housing with a new cable, that's going to give that derailleur and shifter the best opportunity to do its performance. So that's where you're trying to get at when you're doing these particular repairs. So yeah, diving into this. So let me leave at this point, and we'll just go right into showing the after of the cleaning of the parts and whatever else I find, and do a final wrap. But that's kind of what you're looking at when you're looking into how much a bike is going to cost you. And this, go into a little detail to this particular frame. That's kind of cool. Save you for the later point here. This uses a True Temper OX. They call it Platinum. Platinum chromoly. It's a higher end chromoly. This is the next gen. The one before it was Reynolds, and they made it for like about 4 years. So they did halfway through they switched it. And these are also made in the USA, and hand built in the USA, and steel frame. Then they bond the carbon. This is their OCLV, which is Trek's OCLV, which you'd find on the Lance Armstrong bikes, the 5200, 5500s. Same thing here, bonded together, then glued into the frame here, the OCLV. So you got a combination of the carbon fiber and the steel, lighter weight, absorbing a lot of that road vibration. To me, the jury's out on what advantage you're getting technically per se, but at the end of the day, it's a pretty cool frame. I mean, you'll not see a lot of these out there, and it's one of those kind of cool conversation points of like, yeah, LeMond, yeah, he was one of the first Americans to win the Tour de France, and yeah, he made all the geometries. That's what his thing was, the geometries. The rides on these are great. I have two LeMonds personally. I have I think this is Buenos Aires is the full carbon one I have, and I have a Pop Rod cyclocross steel frame. One's full carbon and one's steel. Both excellent bikes. I love the geometry. They just fit me like a glove. But then again, they may not fit you. But they are a pretty cool bike in general. So let me pop this all apart and start getting it all cleaned up, and we'll review all the parts afterwards here and see how those wheels turned out and see if it needs tires in addition to that. So we're looking at sub 200 for general estimate. So let's go forward and see what we have. So here we have it. We have some clean brakes. Shifters cleaned up really well, and the Sonic cleaner decided to put those in there to get them relubed. The crank set turned out to be really clean. Derailleur, jockey pulleys, all disassembled to clean, as well as the cassette. It is going to have a new chain put on there, and this customer wanted them waxed, so I got a pre-waxed chain here, ready to go. Once that is time to be assembled and the wheels trued up and cleaned up very well. And on top of the polishing that I used from Adam Polishes, I got the frame to be a lot better. I mean, it still has its chips and scrapes that I can't get out, of course, but I was able to clean up that scarring back here as well as the other side to make the OCLV part look pretty good. But it did turn out to be pretty nice. So let's recap. Well, diving into it a little bit further, we got some cables in the housing that actually turned out to be kind of rusty. I mean, it's one of those situations where I pulled out the front brake cable and had rust deposits built up inside the housing. So that warranted all of it to be cleaned up to get the braking efficient as well as the shifting being precise. So that is going to be going on, as well as cleaning the whole drivetrain, brakes, and everything in the ultrasonic cleaner to get all the grit out. So basically, this turns out to be almost the same, if not the same as refurbish, what I do to my own bikes when I go to fix them up to sell. So that being said, this is going to run as best as going to be after I'm done with it. Top notch, top of the line, the guy's magic tune-up. But anywho, if you were having this done, obviously the detailing probably would not be available in your neck of the woods, but doing the drivetrain clean and cables and housing and all that kind of replacement would probably run you close to, I would say, $350, that's including with parts, and that would probably get your bike to almost overhaul state. The bottom bracket's good, the headset's still good, and the hubs, so you don't have to tear into any of those. But if you had problems with those, there'd be additional costs on top of that for parts. But in this particular case, those don't need to be done, but the chain, cables and housing, and some other pieces had to be addressed. So there we have it, all ready to go. So check out these pictures after this. What was I doing? Oh yeah, yeah. Let's dive into this. Let's figure this thing out. Where to begin is the question. We'll see. Welcome back to a Noah Guy Bicycle.